Okay, so today we are going to start looking at what is called partial fractions, which basically means you take a fraction and you break it into parts. Okay, so that's basically what we're going to be looking at. It's quite a few steps, so if you look at what I have here written on this sheet, it has multiple steps to help you follow in order to know how to do it. So what we're going to do is we're going to do what's called a partial fraction decomposition. It's essentially taking the fraction and writing it in an equivalent way, but just writing it so it looks different. Okay, so we start with here, we've got 3 over x squared minus 3x. First thing that you do is you look at the denominator. Notice it says you are going to factor the denominator. We are not worried about factoring the numerator, so we do not factor the numerator. Okay, so that's a key, because when you look at some problems here we do in a little bit, the numerator is going to look a little intimidating, but that's not what we're worried about. Right now, the first step is to factor the denominator if it's possible. And if we looked at x squared minus 3x, we have a greatest common factor that we can take out. So the first step is going to be just to take out that x, and you're left with x minus 3. Okay. Step 2 is where we start creating these partial fractions, okay? So we are going to take what we just had. We have 3 over x times x minus 3. And we are going to take each factor in the denominator and break it apart into a piece, okay? So it says break each factor in the denominator into a partial fraction using a and b in the numerator. So we are going to take, we're going to put a in the top, and our first factor is x, so we just put that over there, plus b. We're going to figure out what a and b are here in just a minute, and then we put our second factor here. So our step 1 is we're taking that one that one fraction and breaking it apart into 2 pieces. If there was 3 factors in the denominator, we'd break it apart into 3 pieces, okay? So step 2, we broke it apart. Step 3, we are going to find the common denominator. We want all 3 of our denominators to be the same, because if you have all 3 of your denominators the same, that means that you can just solve the numerator. Okay, so we are just going to rewrite this here. We have x times x minus 3. Okay, and then we have a over x plus b over x minus 3. That's the same thing. Now we need to figure out what we need to do so they all 3 have the same denominator. Well, right now, our a over x has an x, but it is missing x minus 3. So we would need to multiply the top and the bottom of this one by x minus 3. And then if we look at our b factor, or excuse me, our term here with the b in the top, it has an x minus 3, but it is missing an x. And then the key idea here also is that if we have all of our denominators are the same, we can just solve our numerator. Okay, so step 4. All right, we are just looking at our numerator now. We are just looking at what I have highlighted here in green. So we are going to take 3, oops, daisies, let me erase that. I meant to have a pen there and I did not. So we're looking at just our numerator. Since our denominator is the same, we can solve our numerator. So we're going to have 3 equals a times x minus 3 plus b times x. And our goal is we are going to choose values of x that will allow us to figure out what a is and what b is. So it says choose a logical value for x that will eliminate a so you can find b. Okay, so step 1, let's think about what logical value we would use for x. Well, if I want to get rid of a, I'm looking here, if I take a times 0, that would get rid of a, which means I would like to say that x equals, I'm going to use the value x equals 3, and then I'm just going to substitute it into that equation. Okay, so I'm going to have 3 equals A times 3 minus 3 plus B times 3. Okay, well, what happens here, 3 minus 3 is 0, 0 times A, that cancels it. So we have 3 equals 3 times B. If we divide both sides by 3, we get that B equals 1. Okay, so now we know what B is, so now we're going to take this equation that we have written up here, and I'm going to take out B, and I'm going to put 1 in, because I know that B equals 1. So I'm going to rewrite that. 3 equals A times X minus 3 plus B is 1, so I'm going to say 1X. Okay. And then last thing here, we're going to choose another value of X to evaluate A. Okay, so let's think logically here. We can pick any value that we want. It doesn't matter. But if we want to pick out a value that would be easy, an easy value to pick would be X equals 0. Because if I put X equals 0 into this term right here, 0 times 1 is 0, and it eliminates it. So that makes our lives a little bit easier. So we're going to say 3 equals A times 0 minus 3 plus 1 times 0, which is just 0, so that's going to cancel. And we're left with 3 equals negative 3A. Therefore, A equals negative 1. A equals negative 1. Now, down here, I'm going to do a little thought bubble for just a quick second, and I'm going to erase this, but I said we could pick any value we wanted for X. Well, we already picked X equals 3 first. What if I picked X equals 1? I told you it should work for any value of X. So if I put X equals 1 in there, it should still give me that A equals negative 1. So I'm just going to show you that that actually works and it's correct. So I'm going to say 3 equals A times 1 minus 3 plus 1 times 1. I just put 1 in for X. And we have 3 equals negative 2A plus 1. If I subtract 1 from both sides, I get 2 equals negative 2A, and A still equals negative 1. It doesn't matter what value I pick, because it'll be true for all values of X. However, the reason I picked X equals 0 first is because it just easily eliminated that last term. So it really could go, you could pick a different value. If you don't choose to pick the same one that I did, that's fine. And then once we know what A and B are, go back to your partial fraction in step 2. This guy here. Oops. This guy here in step 2. And we're basically going to rewrite it, but now we have a value for A and we have a value for B. So we have 3 over X times X minus 3 equals, instead of A, we are going to put negative 1 over X, plus instead of B, we are going to put 1. And if you actually, okay, so we just basically went back, we figured out what A was, we figured out what B was, and we substituted them in to our original partial fraction equation up there on the top.